We didn't want to be in this conflict. We don't want to be in this conflict. But once we're dragged into the conflict, we're simply not going to sit back and say, well, that's okay, guys. You do your thing and we'll sit here and clean up afterwards. You know, there have been 3,300 rockets fired into Israel in 8 days. I did the calculation just before we started this conversation, and that means 17 rockets an hour, 24 hours a day for the last 8 days. Shot deliberately, directly into our civilian neighborhoods. There is no country in the world, not one, who would not stand up, step forward, and respond to this kind of behavior. That there's no such thing as a military conflict which doesn't involve civilian casualties on both sides of the conflict. And every single time that I hear about another civilian death, whether it's a Palestinian or an Israeli, I'm sickened. This is precisely the reason we didn't want to be in this conflict. But 8 days ago, it's almost exactly 8 days ago, at 6 o'clock Israel time on Monday last week, Hamas gave us an ultimatum, knowing 100% in advance that we were not going to accept their ultimatum. And their ultimatum was that if we don't do whatever it is they want us to do, they are going to open fire on Tel Aviv. This was after they opened fire on Jerusalem. They wanted us to evacuate something, and they wanted us to dismantle something, and I don't even remember what the actual issues were, but they knew in advance that they were inviting us to respond to their fire, because, or alternatively, that their ultimatum was going to turn out to be a fake one. So 6 o'clock came around, and 2 or 3 minutes later, they fired 100 rockets into Tel Aviv. And we're not in the mood to put a Band-Aid on this issue again. So from that moment, it was quite simply a question of how quickly and how much of Hamas's military infrastructure can we dismantle.
What happened in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah quarters, they were trying to evacuate 5 families with around 35 people in them, including women and children, evacuate them from their homes. These families were resided in this quarter based on an agreement between the UN and the Jordanian government at the time, and they fixed this property for them to live in. These people actually were expelled from their original homes in 1948. Now, in 2020 and 2021, the Israelis are trying to push them out of their property again. Now we are talking about a 17 dunums area where 28 families and their offsprings are living. The majority of them are, the number of these residents reaching 600 people. So the plan is by an organization, a settler organization called Nehmat Shimon, trying to take over their homes and expel them out of their property by an Israeli court order. That's where it all started. Every Ramadan, the Israelis increase their harsh measurements against those who want to worship in Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city of Jerusalem. So they started to make more barricades to prevent people from entering Al-Aqsa Mosque to pray. And they started to prevent Palestinians from the West Bank, from the occupied West Bank, to enter Jerusalem, to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's where everything started to unfold. Settlers were allowed to go to the Jewish settlers, were allowed to go inside Al-Aqsa Mosque in an intimidation to the Muslim community. what Netanyahu is trying to do, and he's backed with the right-wing political parties, he's trying to tell the whole world that there is a religious war going on. It's not a religious war. It's people here used to live together centuries ago, before 1948 and before the British decided their Balfour Declaration. So they are turning the whole conflict into a religious war. And that's what we don't want. We want the whole world to know that this is not about religion, it's about stealing the land.
So there was churning in the Israeli politics. Israeli politics. If for the Indian viewers, I must make it clear that Israeli politics is very vibrant. We must. Sometimes people here think that Israel is a very monolith kind of a state, which only look like a army state. Of course, army military has played an important part in since Israel was created because of the number of challenges that faced. But it has never been run by military, and it's a very vibrant society. It's which is reflected in their politics. Simultaneously, Palestine had to hold elections this year, both for the president as well for their council. Now that there have been a power struggle going on between the PLA and as well as the Hamas. This is not nothing, and Hamas have been gaining in support. Hamas has a stronghold in Gaza, and it has been gaining in support in the West Bank. So it was in this context, and the conservative from both sides were adamant on their position. They were trying to change the status quo, and then there was retaliatory strike from Hamas. But this time, the both sides, the reaction, the retaliatory strike, the reaction has been unique because we have never seen so many Israeli cities coming under attack. And also Israel's response to that has also been very strong. We have never seen the entire Gaza coming under attack like this time. Tunnels have been destroyed. There were buildings which have been pounded. This, of course, resulted in the building which was destroyed, which housed the two leading media houses, one a regional media house and another Associated Press, which has a global presence. Of course, that has triggered reaction from the global media.
And here, in the particular case you're talking about, is a building which was not a media building. It was a building which housed a terrorist infrastructure in a part of the building, and which housed the Associated Press and Al Jazeera and others, and probably housed certain other private Palestinian companies and businesses as well, I don't know. In that building was the Hamas military intelligence office used for the collection and assessment of intelligence, a research and development operation for weaponry, and the installation in or on of advanced military equipment. That building. There was, in addition, on a smaller level, an office of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad there. They turn what could have been a civilian location into a military target. The responsibility for casualties lies directly at the doorstep of Hamas. In this particular case that you're talking about, fortunately, there were no casualties because we contacted everybody in the building. We phoned them all. The footage is all there. Everybody's seen it. You Google it. It's out there. It's easy to find. And we gave them all an hour's advance notice to leave. So my answer to you is this, is that while we don't want to see any civilian casualties, and we take significant steps to avoid civilian casualties, we cannot not pursue the degradation and the erosion of the Hamas military infrastructure.
The masses are in support of the Palestinians. The countries, the official Arab governments, some of them are backing the Palestinian right, and some of them, like the Gulf states, who are entered a phase of normalization with Israel by force. I can say that it was forced on them through the prior American government, Trump and Kushner. And this is also to take more money from the Gulf states. The Israelis now are, benefiting out of this relation. It's a one-way relationship where the Israelis are getting more and more money and investments and bringing nothing to the Gulf states. In terms of security, for example, Israel cannot defend its own borders, and it will never be able to defend the Gulf state from an imaginary security situation. So yes, the Arab masses are helping us. The Arab masses are on our side. Tunisia, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco, Algiers, they all had voiced their opposition to what the Israelis are doing, especially now.
If this was a different situation, if there was no COVID, and I'm sure the global reaction would have been different because the priorities, the focus of the various governments would have been different. In the last few years, we have seen China has come up as a geopolitical player. But in West Asia, China has a limited kind of a role. As of now, they have not kept out of all kind of, these rivalries and conflicts. So the US, Joe Biden has supported Israel's right to react, but also called for restraint. He spoke to Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian president, and it has not really, it is not really taking the leadership at this moment because it was in a mood to kind of to move out of this region, spanning from Afghanistan till Israel, and it was in a way continuation of the Trump era where they had encouraged the countries who didn't have diplomatic ties to establish diplomatic ties and to that they manage their own ties. So we saw various countries have started hedging. Qatar normalized relations with Saudi Arabia normalized relations with Qatar. Saudi Arabia, Iran has started talking for the first time in 5 years. So the dynamics were changing. And so it has been largely left to the region to kind of settle their own, own politics and own rivalries. Of course, we see various capitals in the Arab world where there have been protest marches, including in North Africa, to Yemen, huge protest march in Yemen. But there have been a lot of protests which has also happened in Europe, in number of capitals in Europe, So there have been protests by the civil society, but no government has so far kind of played a role, leadership role to bring the two parties together.